Welcome. I'm Alan Franey, one of the programmers at VIFF, and today we'll be speaking with Connie Field about her film Democracy Noir, which is a film about the rise of Viktor Orbán and people like him in Hungary and beyond. And it's particularly relevant to us here in Canada now on the potential eve of a federal election, and of course to Connie's country, the United States, where there is an election very soon between Trump and Kamala Harris. Welcome to the VIFF Podcast. This is your chance to get the inside track from the people behind the films you love and the films you are yet to discover. This podcast was recorded on the unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, recorded during the 43rd edition of the Vancouver International Film Festival. These conversations take us behind the scenes with the creators bringing their work to the big screen. I'm Alan Franey, and this week I'll be in conversation with Connie Field, who is here at the festival after many visits over the years with the new film Democracy Noir. Welcome, Connie.
Thank you, Alan.
So we've had one screening here already, and you have another one today, and you're only with us for a very brief time. But we've been talking about the fact that your film is particularly relevant right now, given that we are on the eve of an election in the United States, and your film describes a perhaps crisis in democracy that's around the world, but specifically as it's represented in Hungary today. So this is a film that you started making several years ago. Could you just describe it for the audience who hasn't seen it yet in your own words?
Well, the film is, in a way, about the rise of Viktor Orbán, who's Prime Minister of Hungary. And it's told through the perspective of three really incredible women who, over the past 12 years, have been using, quote unquote, the means of democracy to try to influence and change their government. And Viktor Orbán basically has changed the constitution in Hungary. He's made it so that he can basically is guaranteed to win elections. It's a story that once democracy has been reshaped the way that Orbán reshaped it through democratic means, it becomes impossible by using democratic means to affect and change it. And in essence, that's kind of what the story shows us.
So for those of you who don't know Connie's work, let's put it in context here. Connie is a very well-known, highly regarded documentary filmmaker from the Bay Area whose films have won acclaim right back from the beginning. The first one I saw was Rosie the Riveter, what year was that?
That was 1980, 81.
81, which was a great film for showing a historical take on the grand feminist themes, and specifically related to Rosie the Riveter, the emblematic figure of the American woman who went to help the war effort and learnt jobs outside of the traditional female roles, and then found that when the men returned from the war front, they were being put back in some of the same boxes that they thought they had broken free of to a certain extent. And then Freedom on My Mind was a film that won the Grand Jury Prize in Sundance and was nominated for an Academy Award. And this took us to the heart of the civil rights struggle in Mississippi, specifically, I think, in the early 60s. And then you worked for many years on a multi-part film called Have You Heard from Johannesburg? talking about apartheid and bringing it up to the present for all the, the deep invested focus in politics, civil rights, and the whole big picture there. And then most recently, you were here at the festival with the whistleblower of My Lai, and then traveled to Vietnam with that. So you've got a history of making films that are about not just political topics, but in the large view of history. And this is a film that you started making before Trump was really on the credible horizon as president, and yet it's so relevant to now on the eve of the election. Can we just talk about both more of what the film shows us in terms of the specifics of Orbán, but also what it can tell us about these trends internationally, these political tides?
Well, Orbán kind of represents a new kind of authoritarian, who basically is using democracy to undermine democracy. This is not what's been done before. He's not at all like traditional dictators. He doesn't have to jail his opponents. He doesn't have to try to kill them like Putin does, largely because he has done such a successful job of kind of sewing up the system to keep himself in power. And he's done that through, well, one interesting thing, that I kind of discovered with this is that there's something basically wrong in various constitutions in various countries that allow for democracy to be undermined. And specifically in Hungary, one of the main things they did when they formed their new constitution, which isn't very old because it was right after the fall of the Berlin Wall, right around 1990, and in their constitution, they said that if any party gained 2/3 of the majority of the seats in parliament, they can change the constitution. Now, why they did this, I haven't studied it, so I don't really know. I'm sure there was some reason for it. But this is what allowed Orbán to completely change everything to keep himself in power. He was elected in 2010, and by 2011, he completely changed the Constitution. He changed the way votes were counted. He changed what was in the Constitution. He said in the Constitution they're creating a Christian national state. He said in the Constitution that marriage is between a man and a woman. He even put the rights of the fetus in the Constitution in 2011. He hasn't moved on it. He moves very slowly. I mean, he put this all in so he could, deal with it whenever he wanted to. And then bit by bit, he starts closing in on things. So this has created a situation which it's really a new kind of dictator, completely new. It hasn't been here before.
It's interesting when we think about corrupt societies or ones where there's more room for corruption, and then societies where the rule of law protects us from bad players, whether they be criminals or government. And this is all predicated on law, which is ultimately predicated on a constitution. And constitutions evolve, there are amendments and so on, but the situation you're describing here is, it sounds like a clever, in some sense, manipulation of things that is self-serving. And I know from seeing the film that one of the ways this was achieved was by the usual sort of populist ways of turning factions against each other, playing rural against urban, nationalists against immigrants, et cetera, et cetera. So you said he's not like Putin and that he doesn't need to resort to force. But when you describe this manipulation of the Constitution, it sounds like he's taken some manipulable elements, but then also protected once he's worked these, like gerrymandering, for example, for political short-term ends, then has been able to freeze it in such a way that it's harder to undo for anyone else in the immediate future.
Well, you can't undo it unless your party gets 2/3 majority in Parliament. He literally changed the Constitution.
But then the next party is not as able to change it back.
They'd have to have 2/3 majority. Mm-hmm. That's very hard to get. Mm-hmm. And especially since the opposition is 6 or 7 different parties. I mean, it's a politically very difficult situation. I mean, we have a difficult situation in the United States. Okay, the way our country is split, and it's certainly between the way our news media is split, we don't share the same facts. It's really a big, big mess. But the thing that we do have is we've got 2 major parties, and they're both equally financed. I mean, they both have a lot of money. And in Hungary, Fidesz has a lot of money, and all the other little parties don't have hardly money at all. So it's truly very, very difficult. Though what's incredible about the Hungarians is they don't give up. I mean, they just don't give up. And they continue to protest. They continue to try to work. They continue to hope. There's a new guy named Peter Magyar who split from Fidesz, and he has now formed yet another party. At this current moment, he's a member of the EU from Hungary, and he's trying to mount, an attack and on Orbán, and he's doing very, very well. He had a demonstration in Budapest. 200,000 people came. So this kind of the soul of the Hungarians, I think, is really amazing, that they don't give up. And the film really, really does show that. But he's done things like, it's not only gerrymandering. It used to be that, okay, you got, 37%, and Fidesz, his party, got the rest. It would be split, 37 to the opposition, this to Fidesz. What he did is winner take all, meaning that if Fidesz had 51% of that area, they get 100%. And this is how he keeps his 2/3 majority in Parliament.
So having talked about some of the ways this is being done, let's turn to what the real issue here and what the dangers are and what this means outside of Hungary. So you're an American. Your interest in Hungary is partly through your husband, who's Hungarian, and it's a place that you've been to, you know fairly well. But I suspect that your interest in this was not just out of the curiosity in the family about what's happening in your husband's home country, but the urgency that this represents for what's happening around the world in general. So how large a frame should we be thinking of here? I mean, how many countries come immediately to mind for you, or you've thought about over the years as you've been watching while making this film, on how the parallels between what's happening in different countries? Well,
you used to have clear parallels between Turkey and Brazil and Belarus, but it's all over Europe. I mean, basically all of the countries in Europe are very concerned about this. There's been 2 very big successes on the right wing. What just happened in Austria, what's happened in parts of Germany, what happened in France, almost happened in France. And it's interesting what's feeding all of this. In my country, I mean, it's a similar kind of thing. It's basically what Trump is feeding into, and he's doing it in the same manner that Orbán has done, make boogeymen. Okay, the boogeymen are the immigrants. Orbán built a wall in 2015, way before Trump, even before Trump was running, and Trump has really followed and copied Orbán. And Orbán built this wall against immigrants who were coming largely from Syria at that time, who only wanted to cross through Hungary. They didn't want to stay in Hungary. None of them. They were heading for, more Northern Europe, where they had family and friends and it's more hospitable. But he made a huge thing about it. So he's telling everybody, this is your enemy and I'm going to save you from this enemy. And Trump is doing the same thing, turning immigrants into horrible monsters who are going to come rape everybody's daughters and, whatever else. Look, we have a somewhat of an immigration problem, but not a huge one in America. We really don't. We don't have as big a problem as Europe does. I was almost, before I got interested in this, I actually wanted to do a film about immigration in Europe because I was fascinated by it. Because coming from America, we're a country of immigrants. All of us. My father wasn't even born there. So it's different. And Europe, which I, got to know through my husband and have been all over, and he's like a walking history book, so he can tell me everything about it. And I love the cultures. I really love the cultures. And I don't want to see them disappear. I don't want to see them become like America, where we're many, many, many different cultures are shaping us. And I thought it must mean something different there. And I think it does. I mean, you've got very old cultures with lots of tradition. And an interesting side story about this, there was a young man from Syria who moved to a smaller town in Germany, and he became mayor of that town. And the way he became mayor of that town is he just got into the culture that was there and participated in it. And people felt like he respected them and whatever. So that there's questions, there's real questions about how do you handle different cultures coming into your cultures. Okay, and in Europe, they've had a problem dealing with it. The people on the left want to help everybody. They feel guilty because of colonialism. They feel guilty because of climate change, because it's really those countries that have hurt the countries where we're getting a lot of climate refugees from. And on the other side, you've got the right wing who doesn't want the culture changed, doesn't want these people in their country, etc. And it's not coming together to come up with something that can speak to both those sides, which is important there. So all of these things are being used. I mean, in our country, we've got a big problem with the white working class of America has taken a huge hit because of neoliberalism and lots of jobs going overseas, etc. And the Democratic Party, which used to be the party of the working class, veered off, largely Clinton did most of this, to become a much more centrist party and a neoliberal party, creating policies that were really hurting these people. And these are the people that Trump speaks to. And they're also people who feel they're not being helped in America. The people who are being helped in America are the black people in America or the brown people in America, and there's special programs, and they get in line first for everything. And the white people, these poor white people, are being kept back. And they used to be able to think of themselves as on the top of society, and the brown people and the black people more towards the bottom of the society, and everything's getting tipped around. And then we had a black president, and then history. We've seen what's happened. All hell broke loose. Yeah, so all these things are feeding into a rise on the right all over the world now. And it's dangerous because there's limits to people's freedoms, tremendous limits by the ideology of the right. And it's something that we have to fight everywhere. I think you have to also fight it in Canada. And so this is really, what's going on in Hungary is a global problem. It's not just Hungary.
And you said at the screening last night to a question that this film has had immediate interest in Europe that you're not seeing reflected as much in the United States yet, which is a bit disturbing. Can you just describe, first of all, the European front?
Well, let me say that in terms of distribution and dealing with the film in the United States, we haven't even gotten it going. I mean, it showed in one place, it's only showed in Boston, where it got a standing ovation, which was great. Everybody totally understood, and the question was from the audience, why isn't this all over America now? And, well, part of that is just we haven't figured out the distribution. Mm-hmm. We haven't yet been able to raise the huge financing you need to do for an impact campaign, which we tried to do. My producer is from Denmark. She's European. We had European TV money into the film, through Europe, and it's being broadcast in probably 10, 15 countries, all over Europe.
Including
Germany, France, Austria, Belgium, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Finland, because they already know and they're familiar with Orbán.
So there's a need to know in Europe, obviously. They all are, well, people are concerned and aware of what this means, so they're interested in the film a priori, one might say, whereas some people know who Orbán is. I mean, I think people who are interested in the world and read the news are, but maybe it was only in the presidential debate that some people heard the word Orbán when Trump invoked him.
Yeah, I think that's part of the problem. And so the film was just released in the end of March, and so it's new relatively. And what can I say? We haven't quite gotten our act together on how to successfully
for distribution in the States,
to get it into the United States. It was almost bought by Frontline, which is a great program. They're aware of Orbán. But they had too many things, already lined up through the end of the year to make it possible at this short notice to do it. So, we're looking for an angel to sort of understand the urgency of this and kind of come step in and let's get this.
And let's hope it's done soon, because the urgency, I think it's so illuminating about our present situation. But going back to the film...
But wait, I want to add one thing, Alan. Mm-hmm. When people in America see it, they see the immediate parallels. Mm-hmm. They all see it. The few Americans that I tested it out before, young and older, and plus the audience, people really see. They see their own situation reflected immediately in Hungary and immediately through Trump.
And what the film is so good at doing is... beyond just saying, oh, Orbán's horrible, it shows how an actually very rational, articulate person who can have a friendly face most of the time can work all the available angles to achieve goals that are dangerous and potentially quite dangerous, right? So it's not like you're seeing Putin or Hitler at work here, and he certainly is much more appealing a figure than Trump is. Well, however, it's understanding how things work and how they can be manipulated that is so valuable.
Well, yes, but it's also he's more reasonable than Trump, and he's not as frightening as Trump. Trump is a loose wire, and he's very, very scary. Orbán is an ideologue, And Orbán is seriously trying to leave a legacy of his ideology. But what's interesting about it, he's very similar to Trump in terms of this ideology. Orbán was a liberal. Orbán was sent to Oxford on a scholarship by George Soros, who he's turned into the big boogeyman of the world now. What Orbán did, Orbán was in power from 1998 to 2002. Is much more liberal then in Hungary. Then he got defeated by the socialists. So he went around and he found himself a constituency that he could represent, that would bring him to power. And this constituency was in the countryside, it was more rural, it was very nationalistic, it was more religious, it was all these things. And he developed an ideology to appeal to them. Trump has done the same thing. Trump is liberal on abortion. He's liberal on a lot of things, okay? He is not particularly... These are the people that are going to give him power. And Orbán did exactly the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Now, looking at the specifics of the film, we haven't really talked about the fact that it's based around 3 women, that this was your story, really, your narrative focus, to ground it in the human dimension. So tell us a little bit about them. There's 3. One's a journalist, one's a nurse, and one is almost a professional protester. How would you describe them?
Well, the nurse is the professional protester.
Okay.
And there's a opposition politician, Timea Sabo, and Timea came into government in 2010, just when Orbán's real reign came in. And she was bright-eyed, bushy-tailed, very young, and very into Green Party ideology and sustainability and human rights. And this is what she was going to bring to Hungary. And bam, she gets hit in the face with Orbán, which meant instead of bringing these wonderful new ideas that our society needs to sustain itself, she was just fighting to try to bring democracy back. And that's what she spent the last 12 years trying to do. Babette is a journalist. She was a young journalist when Orbán came to power. She even voted for Orbán. And then slowly she saw it was, so corrupt and so destructive that, she began her focus journalistically on corruption and telling the story of one of Orbán's childhood friends that Orbán has made into one of his premier oligarchs, and he's become the richest man in Hungary through what the government's done with him, and that's a big part of the story. Babette's also gay and is married through like a common law, partnership. And so personally faces all the, gay attacks that Orbán has been doing, which is also very similar to the United States and going on in a lot of places. So it's personally very problematic and worrisome for Babette. Babette has also had a really interesting career working on so many different news stations that have one by one been taken over by Orbán's people. Orbán has taken over all of the media, almost all the broadcast media, everything that goes to the countryside, every single newspaper that's in the whole rest of the country is owned by his people. So that Babette has, like any of the, very concerned journalists, ended up, going from place to place and landing up on the different news organizations that are now on the internet in Hungary, major news organizations who've had to migrate to that. They are followed by people in Budapest. Budapest is like another country. I mean, Budapest is like Hungary's California, or the west coast of the California, because the inside of California is really very right-wing. But and the mayor of Budapest is in the hands of the opposition. It really is like a completely different country, and it's one of the most beautiful cities in the entire world. I love Budapest.
I think it's worth saying that Canadians, we are a country of immigrants, and we all understand that one of the principal driving reasons for people to immigrate is prosperity, to find a better future, better material future.
And persecution.
Persecution, and also beyond just persecution, it's the idea that you live in a country where there's very little corruption. So even if you're not persecuted, that you know that a policeman is not going to be trying to extort you, and that politicians are generally watched by the system, that they can't get away with things, that even if they're not honest, that the system provides checks and balances.
Maybe in Canada, but this is not happening in the United States anymore.
No, it's true, right? To position various countries relative to each other. Canada is still a place where there's a high level of trust and confidence. And we take it for granted until we meet people who have moved here from other countries, and they'll tell you, it's not just that we like the social programs here and think we can make more money. We like the fact that it is a clean, morally clean government, and the police and military you don't need to be afraid of them.
You're lucky. I wish this was still the case in the United States, but it's actually not. Mm-hmm. It's actually not now.
Yeah.
Yeah, and also different kinds of corruptions happen. I mean, in our country, politics have always been owned by the rich. In the case of Hungary, just like Russia, Orbán created his oligarchs. He made his oligarchs, and they're completely loyal to him. Okay? And the same thing happened in Russia with Putin. So, but it ends up being, well, it's different. I mean, that's why it's more dictatorial in those countries. We get dictated on by the very wealthy in our country. They really are dictators.
Well, I think that this film...
Though Trump is going to change all that.
And we have a federal election coming up before long here. And I think for the first time in a while, because we have a conservative leader who is pretty self-evidently fashioning himself in part on this populist demagoguery, we have new reasons to worry. And I think your film is not just relevant for the present situation, but it's a very valuable historical record that these are important to be mindful of. So I want to thank you so much for making this film. This took you years, and we want to wish you immediate success with getting it seen.
Thank you, Alan. Appreciate that.
You have been listening to the VIFF Podcast. Thanks to our community broadcast partner, Tell Us Story Hive, for their support. If you're enjoying the show, please rate and review the podcast, and be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss an episode. Visit viff.org to learn more about the Vancouver International Film Festival and see what's on at the VIFF Centre year-round.